What's up, guys? Maidenslave here, and today we're talking about the X Factor. Now let's go back to 1993 and try to live life through Steve Harris's eyes. His band was falling apart. There was a lot of tension between Bruce Dickinson and the rest of the band. And right before the last half of the Fear the Dark tour, Bruce announced to the entire band that he was going to quit, that he was finally going to pursue a full-time solo career. Now the whole band knew that he was eventually going to do this since at least 1990, but the timing in which he made the announcement was just cruddy. The rest of the band for the rest of that tour felt like he was not giving it his all. They felt like he didn't give a shit, especially Steve and Nico. And personally for me, I really feel like he wasn't giving a shit from 1990, in the studio, on tour. It just seemed like he didn't care anymore. And finally he left. I think he should have been kicked out a lot earlier than that, but that's just me. Now Steve Harris lost his golden goose. He lost his frontman of about 10 years. And on top of that, he was about to lose Martin Birch. Martin Birch retired. The last thing that he did with Iron Maiden was produce Live at Dunnington, or Real Live Dead one. But going into the next album, Steve Harris no longer had Bruce Dickinson or Martin Birch. And on top of that, he was going through a divorce. Now Iron Maiden had to find a replacement for Bruce Dickinson, and that's exactly what fans thought that they were going to get. A clone of Bruce Dickinson. A Bruce Dickinson-esque, Dio-esque, Jeff Tate-esque, high-screaming singer. But that's not what Steve wanted, because that's not what Steve was feeling at the time. Steve was going through an extremely dark time in his life. And he didn't want to find a clone of Bruce Dickinson. He wanted to find somebody else that was completely different. And he pretty much did that in Blaze Bayley, ex-singer of Wolfsbane. Now Blaze Bayley kind of came out of left field for a lot of Maiden fans when they heard about it, because either they weren't familiar with him, or when they did hear him they thought, wow, he sings a little bit too low. He's definitely not going to be able to replace Bruce Dickinson. Now once again, Steve wasn't trying to replace Bruce. He was trying to find something new. And the X Factor is the birth of a new band. Now, in The Number of the Beast, I explained my ideas and thoughts of Iron Maiden creating certain templates for albums. And on The Number of the Beast, they created a template. They made a formula, and they did that up until about Fear the Dark. Now, on the X Factor, they completely wiped the slate clean and started all over with a new formula. Now, producing the album is mainly Steve Harris with the help of Nigel Green. So the actual production on the album, compared to some of the albums in the 80s, it kind of lacks a little bit. Some people complain that it's a little bit too quiet. I feel like it's a little bit thin in the bass area. It's obviously not Martin Birch quality. But, that's just me. And, if it is too quiet, as some of you like to say, just turn it up. It's that simple. Now, the artwork on this album is actually very unique, too. It's something new as well. For the first time, they actually had an artist come in, and I can't recall the name, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to put it up somewhere. Actually put together a real life form of Eddie, and it was him being tortured on the cover, which to me is just a brilliant idea. It was just it was new. It was a good progression. It was 90s, as they said. It was it was just a very new thing to do. It was very gory, and actually it was so gory that a lot of record stores actually wanted some kind of an alternative art cover, and they have an alternative art cover which is kind of the same figure, but he's sitting on like an electric chair / torture chair type device with the X in back of him, and to me it looks really cheesy. He just kind of looks like a puppet, and you can't see him that well anyways. Now before we go into the actual material on the album, I want to address a few issues about the album and maybe about this whole Blaze Bayley era. First of all, the album, though. Now, the X Factor is extremely, extremely unique. It is a very unique Iron Maiden album because up until this point and after this point until today, Iron Maiden usually write songs that tell stories or they talk about something. But the X Factor actually is very autobiographical. It is an introspect of the human psyche. And a lot of the lyrics, a lot of people say that the lyrics kind of depict war. And yeah, the actual content might be about war, but it's told through kind of somebody telling the story. And a lot of that is Steve. You know, as I said, he was going through a very, very rough time in his life, and he wrote these lyrics, and at the end of the day, he kind of just formed more Maiden-esque themes around them. But it's very deep, and I think that with the X Factor in particular, a lot of Iron Maiden fans either absolutely love it and they see its brilliance and they see how deep it is, and the other, say 50% think that it's too long, they think it's boring, they don't want to give it a chance because it's not Bruce Dickinson. Now, for those Iron Maiden fans out there that don't even give the X Factor or Virtual 11 a chance because it's not Bruce, you're not Iron Maiden fans, you're Bruce Dickinson fans. If you were Iron Maiden fans, you would give these albums a chance and you would realize that there is excellent, excellent material on these albums. Now let's move on to the actual album. I want to try not to spend too much time on this album, but I have a feeling that I'm going to spend a lot of time on it because I think it's a great, great album. Now it opens up with Sign of the Cross, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with because it is one of their most famous songs, and it was made even more famous on Rock in Rio and so on. But anyways, let's go back to the framework of the album. Now, for the first time ever, Iron Maiden opened an album with the album's epic. And yeah, it is an epic. We haven't heard an epic like this since Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. And it actually is very similar to Seventh Son in its brilliance and the way it was written. And it definitely is up there as one of the best epics, if not one of the best Iron Maiden albums, if not the best, song, if not the best Iron Maiden song. And at the same time, it opens the album very well because right off the bat, you can feel that this is not Power Slave. This isn't Somewhere in Time. It doesn't start out fast. There's not going to be some high, flashy screamer on there. It's a dark, complex album, and it starts out that way. Now, Sign of the Cross, the song, as I was saying, is an excellent song, one of the best songs Steve Harris has ever written, and in my opinion is his last best epic that he ever wrote. And Blaze absolutely pulls it off really, really good. The low part in the beginning is excellent. And when Steve first brought the idea of Sign of the Cross to the band, it took them about 2 or 3 weeks to even get the idea of what he was trying to teach them around their head. And when they finally started getting it together, on the actual chorus, the Sign of the Cross, it started clicking. And they probably spent more time recording Sign of the Cross than any other song on the album, which is no surprise. It's the longest song on the album. And as far as Blaze goes, when he was recording vocals for that song, at least that song, probably more, he would record them at different times. Say on the low parts, like in the beginning, he would come into the studio at like 6 a.m. in the morning when his voice is very when you wake up in the morning, your voice is kind of low, and he would sing the chorus, like on a Friday night when he was loud and he was excited. So they put a lot of time and a lot of thought into this song. And, you know, this is something that they completely didn't do on the last two albums, you know. Put together, you know, a full production, give the music a lot of time that it deserves. Now, speaking of the time that it deserves, they spent about a year on the X Factor, which for Iron Maiden is a ridiculous amount of time to spend on an album. Average, Iron Maiden will spend about 2 months from beginning to end on an album, and in many cases they spent less time than that. Like somewhere in Time and Power Slave were made probably within a month and a half. So they really spent a lot of time writing great music and making sure that it was going to be of high quality. On this album, we finally start seeing a lot better writing skills from Yannick Gers, and he actually kind of replaces Adrian in the writing field with Steve Harris. Steve Harris writes most of the album, and most of the album is told through his lyrics, but he gets a lot of help from Yannick, and he actually gets a lot of help from Blaze. And they put together, for the first time ever, we get to see Yannick actually write some good music, and it starts with Lord of the Flies. He wrote the opening riff, which is one of the coolest guitar riffs I've ever heard, and the song itself is really good. And it's actually one of the shorter and faster songs in the album, which makes it really good. It was also a single. Just great writing by Yannick and Steve and Blaze, I believe, who also helped on that song. Now the next song on the album is Man on the Edge, which is probably the weakest song on the album, but it's not bad. It is, once again, it is one of the shorter songs on the album. It was a single, and it was also a music video, and it was like #1 single, and Yannick Gers and Blaze Bayley wrote it together. And it's not a bad song, you know, it's really cool. The lyrics, especially relative to the rest of the album, are pretty weak, maybe even a little bit cheesy. It's about the movie Falling Down. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's actually a really cool movie. And the song's not bad. Weakest on the album, but it's not bad. Now I want to get back to Blaze Bayley for a second. When Iron Maiden announced that Blaze was going to sing for Iron Maiden, as I was saying, a lot of people were surprised because that's all they knew from Blaze was what he did in Wolfsbane, and he admits to this day that until he met Steve Harris, he had never found his voice. And when Steve Harris heard him in Wolfsbane, he knew he had something special in there, and that is exactly what Steve wanted on the X Factor. He knew he wanted this. He knew it. He could see it. He could hear it. And from this point on, it just produced so many good albums as far as Blaze goes. After he left the band with his own solo work, he kind of took the formula of the X Factor and he put it on all of his solo albums, and he produced really good solo albums. But anyways, moving forward. Fortunes of War. Another amazing song, and from this point on in the album, a lot of the songs actually start out really slow. But the intros aren't too short, and they all set up the perfect atmosphere, and they all have the perfect breaking point. And they all have breaking points. And Blaze's vocals just supply the right quality, the right tone to these songs. It's just brilliant. It's dark, you know. And Fortunes of War is one of the most underrated songs. I mean, this is the most underrated Iron Maiden album, especially for how good it is. But Fortunes of War is just a brilliant song, and to me, I consider it up there with, as far as Steve Harris's writing qualities go, I consider it up there with Hallowed Be Thy Name and Fear the Dark. To me, they're all in the same boat. Moving on to Live for the Truth, another great song right here. Brilliant, brilliant song. Once again, great writing by Steve, great lyrics by Steve, great vocal performance by Blaze. Moving on to the Aftermath, which I believe Yannick helped again, and once again, his writing skills just really came out on the song, man. It's just, you know, all these songs kind of have the same formula in that they, like I was saying, they start out slow, but they kind of build in this way that just works. And later on in Maiden's career, they try to do that, but it doesn't work. But on this album, it just did. Now, moving on to another much more upbeat song on the album, which was also written by Steve, Judgment of Heaven, which is a really cool song, very upbeat, kind of has a bassy intro, just kind of a classic. It kind of gets back to that more of that classic Steve material, kind of the shorter, like Trooper-esque songs. Now, Blood on the World's Hand is probably the weakest of the long songs on the album. But it is interesting in that it starts out with a bass solo, which is pretty odd. Now, Steve Harris denies that it's an actual solo, but it's a solo, and it's very impressive. It's kind of sporadic, kind of all over the place, kind of more like Cliff Burton-esque. Instead of what Steve usually does, which is he kind of just writes brilliant bass lines within his music. Moving on to The Edge of Darkness. Now, to me, The Edge of Darkness just summarizes and kind of just depicts the whole album, the whole tone of the album. Brilliant song. If there was a title song to this album, it would be The Edge of Darkness. Moving on to 2 a.m. Once again, one of the less talked about songs in the album, but very underrated. 2 a.m. is. And 2 a.m. is a perfect example of what I was talking about, of the fact that the X Factor is a very introspective album. And the lyrics in 2 a.m. are, you know, like eerily autobiographical. You know, there's been times in every guy's life that they go through what 2 a.m. is about. Kind of just questioning life in and of itself. I mean, that's what the X Factor really is about. When you get to the core of it, it's about, is there a meaning to life? You know, and if there is, then what is it? You know, it's just the lyrical content plus the music and the arrangements. It just makes up a beautiful album. And the last song on the album is The Unbeliever. And, you know, here we go. I was just talking about, you know, this album really questions life itself. And The Unbeliever obviously is about an unbeliever. That is in religion. A lot of people, I've heard a lot of people actually say that the Unbeliever is kind of unnecessary, that they should have just ended the album before The Unbeliever. A lot of people kind of say that it's a little bit too long. And this was more back in the day before Iron Maiden was doing 76-minute long albums. But The Unbeliever is a great song. It starts out kind of weird, with a weird tone, especially compared to the rest of the album. It doesn't start out slow. It starts out really fast. But once it kind of gets into it, it's brilliant. And it gets back to the brilliant writing style that Steve Harris had, you know, during this time. Now, in my Seventh Son of a Seventh Son review, I said that two words come to mind when I think of that album right off the back. Number one, radiance, you know, color. And number two, magic. Now, two words come to my mind when I think of the X Factor right off the bat. Number one, darkness. And number two, magic. The X Factor has the same magic and the same attention given to it that Seventh Son of a Seventh Son did. And it does not even get close to the gratitude that it deserves, just because it's not Bruce Dickinson. And I think that this is just, you know, it'll never change, but I just think that it, you know, it's just so, it's so fucked up, you know what I'm saying, that No Prayer for the Dying, You Fear the Dark will get more attention than the X Factor, when in reality the X Factor is a way better album than those albums. You know, Iron Maiden a few times in their career, to me, kind of had all the planets and stars align, like I was talking on Seventh Son of Seventh Son, and it happened on Seventh Son of Seventh Son. And for me, it probably happened one or two more times in their career, and the X Factor is one of those times. I don't think that we'll ever get another album like the X Factor, because I don't think that those circumstances will ever happen again. It's kind of one of those, like, a lot of bad stuff happens, but don't worry, because something good will come of it. Well, something good came of all the bad stuff that was happening in Iron Maiden, and that is the X Factor. The X Factor is just a gift from Iron Maiden to us. It is one of the most brilliant, it is one of the deepest, it is just one of the most well put together, one of the most well thought out albums I've ever listened to, and it is usually the first album that I'll listen to when I listen to Iron Maiden after not listening to them for a long time. Now, I've seen the X Factor get very, very poor reviews from even people on YouTube that claim to be Iron Maiden fans. And the highest review that I'll ever see it get up to is probably about an 8, and that's from somebody that realizes how good the album actually is. And I'm not saying that Blaze Bayley is a better singer than Bruce Dickinson. That doesn't matter. Iron Maiden is Iron Maiden. When I was a kid, the first Iron Maiden CD I ever had was Ed Hunter. And to me, it made no difference if it was Bruce, Paul, or Blaze. It just mattered if it was a good song. I didn't even realize it as a kid. So when I heard the X Factor, I was like, fuck! I got that same feeling that I got when I listened to Power Slave, when I listened to Seventh Son, when I listened to Brave New World. Now, I know my score is probably going to be pretty controversial, but I don't really give a shit, because I have thoroughly been into Iron Maiden for more than half my life. I've gone through so many phases. I have listened to every single album a countless amount of times. I've listened to B-sides. I've watched countless amount of interviews. I've read reviews. I've read books about Iron Maiden. I really qualify my scores as good scores, and you guys can say whatever the hell you want to say about the score that I'm going to give the X Factor, but at the end of the day, I want you guys to take whatever album you think is better than the X Factor, listen to it, and then listen to the X Factor. And honestly, forget about Bruce, forget about Blaze, just worry about Iron Maiden, worry about quality, listen to the album that you think is better, and listen to the X Factor with a completely open mind. And you tell me which album is better, and be honest. I'm going to give the X Factor by Iron Maiden a 10 out of 10. For me, it doesn't get any better for Iron Maiden. Once again, everything worked. Everything. The entire album is brilliant. It leaves me wanting more.